I'm Dwight Drummond. Tonight, Jacob Hogard will remain out on bail as he awaits sentencing on his sex assault conviction. A judge tightening bail conditions for the former Headley frontman. Will have details on today's court developments. Plus,
everything's gone. Everything's lost. Clothing, food, furniture.
We're very fortunate with the number of people in this building that there was absolutely no reported injuries.
Dozens of families are without a home tonight after a Mississauga townhouse complex was gutted by fire. And
if you boil it right down, the root of it comes to just a mistrust between the players and the CSA.
Where do things go next in the battle between the men's national team and Canada Soccer? An Ontario judge outlined bail conditions for Canadian musician Jacob Hogard a day after the former Headley lead singer was found guilty in the sexual assault of an Ottawa woman. Hogard's lawyer says they are appealing. He was also found not guilty of other charges involving a teenage fan. Eli Glasner now with this report.
The latest development in the sexual assault trial that stretched over a month will see Jacob Hogard returning home to Vancouver, where he'll be out on bail awaiting the sentencing for the sexual assault charge a jury convicted him of yesterday. After 6 days of deliberating, the jury returned a split decision, finding Hogard guilty of sexual assault of one woman from Ottawa who was in her early 20s at the time, but acquitting him of sexual assault of a woman who was 16 at the time, and finding him also not guilty of sexual interference for an alleged groping incident of the same woman when she was 15. Hogard will prepare for sentencing in Vancouver, where he'll be subject to a curfew and there will be random compliance checks. Sentencing is expected in August. The maximum penalty for sexual assault is 14 years. Sunday's result was the culmination of over 40 hours of deliberations by the jury. Defense and Crown painted two dramatically different pictures. Crown calling the former musician a violent sexual opportunist. Defense saying he was candid about his lifestyle and sexual preferences. The jury had many questions for the judge as they weighed their options.
Viewers probably have heard me bellyaching about how unusual it is that a jury is asking for a playback of everything, a redo of the trial that they just heard within a couple of weeks.
This defense lawyer was surprised the jury essentially listened to the trial a second time during deliberations.
Now, just for people to know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's kosher. They're allowed to ask for what they want, but usually it's a piece of evidence that they don't think they heard right, or they don't think they took down correctly, or something that one juror may be saying in the jury room, but another jury goes, that's not what they said.
Instead, the jury used their time to re-listen to the testimony of both accusers, ultimately deciding that what happened to the woman from Ottawa was sexual assault. Currently, neither the Crown or defense have shared plans to appeal. In the meantime, Hogard is scheduled to appear in court to address a separate charge of sexual assault from a woman in Kirkland Lake on August 4th. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
And you heard the update off the top that Hogard will appeal. Now, a judge has handed down a sentence in the case of Raymond Burke. He's the man found guilty of kidnapping and sexually assaulting two women in Toronto in the mid-'80s. Burke fled Canada to the U.S., where he was convicted on similar crimes. He returned to Canada in 2015, and the complex case has been before the courts ever since. Shannon Martin was in court today, and Shannon, lots of emotions around this case.
Absolutely. You know, the sentence, Dwight, is 19 years, but after time served, that drops to 9 years, 11 months. The two survivors, Nicole Murdoch and Angela English, were there in court for that moment. Remember, they only met in November. They knew about each other for decades, but only recently connected through the court process. They have now formed an incredible bond. Today's sentence was certainly not what they were hoping for. They wanted to see Burke spend the rest of his life behind bars. Outside court, they were visibly emotional. Here's more from them.
I think I'm a little overwhelmed. Hoping for more, but know that he did get more than most women get for what they've been through. So hopefully it'll set a precedent to start giving, criminals like this a higher sentence. You know, our life was ruined for all these years, and he got 19 years, so it's a little disappointing.
So as for Burke, he is now 69 years old. He represented himself throughout this process. He didn't say much today at all, except before the proceeding even got underway. He seemed to be looking in the direction of the women. They were sitting along a wall of windows. Nicole Murdoch asked her lawyer to get Burke to stop. He stood up and in a loud, booming voice said, quote, "What am I, subhuman? What is this, death row? Am I here to die?" An officer of the court was able to get him seated and looking straight ahead, but certainly this is not the first outburst that court has seen, and that's something the judge referred to in her sentencing today, saying he has repeatedly shown this kind of anger towards women. She also said this: "It is necessary to denounce brutal and horrific crimes in the strongest terms, to victimize young, vulnerable women and subject them to brutal criminal acts is reprehensible." Dwight?
So with all of that said, not quite the sentence the women were hoping for, Shannon, but they say there has been good to come out of this. And what is next for them? Advocacy at this point?
That's right. You know, we talked to them earlier this spring, and when their story went public, they heard from a number of survivors of violence. And in the courtroom today, it was full of supporters, almost a dozen people, some of them strangers, but it shows you the kind of impact that they've had, and they plan to keep going.
Our new role is to become an advocate for other persons, whether you're gay, trans, woman, child, that encounters such violence and abuse, that, you know what, we deserve to be heard, we will be heard, and no longer are we silenced. You can't push us away. You can't make it difficult for us to get justice. Like, this is insanity what me and her have been through. You know, it's, yeah, you're attacked all the time. So we got to make it easy. We have to change the laws.
So Dwight, they say the best thing to come out of that is all of this conversation. Even if it took them 36 years to get justice, they want other survivors to use their voices and take their power back.
Yeah, we thank them for their bravery, and thank you for bringing this story to us, Shannon.
You're welcome.
It's 1 year to the day since the deadly attack in London, Ontario, that police say was hate-motivated. 4 members of the Afzaal family, spanning 3 generations, were killed after being hit by a truck while out for an evening walk. Many say it's not just enough to mark the anniversary of their tragic deaths. They want to see concrete steps to address Islamophobia. Talia Ricci reports.
Throughout this year of grieving, a close friend of Salman Afzaal describes fleeting thoughts of being able to see him again.
We still can't believe it that has happened, and Salman is not with us anymore. We just can't believe it. We think like maybe during the pandemic we didn't see each other, so it's the same situation. We are not just seeing each other. He'll be around.
1 year ago today, Salman, his wife Madiha, their daughter Yumna, and Salman's mother Talat were run down while out for a walk. The couple's 9-year-old son was seriously hurt but survived. Imran Saeed says Salman was more like family to him.
We used to meet each other every evening in the mosque. So that's not there anymore. And honestly, I'll be very honest, after that I have switched the mosque. I go to a different mosque now because it doesn't look the same.
Police say the family was targeted because of their Muslim faith. This week there have been marches, vigils, and events like this one, which dedicated a community garden to the Afzaals. Many of these events were planned by youth in the community.
I want to see our voices actually being heard rather than people saying, oh, we are going to do this, we're going to do this to stop it, but nothing actually being done.
On Sunday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with the organizers and recognized that more needs to be done. Today, the government made this announcement.
The call for applications. The application process is open for anyone interested to fulfill the role to become Canada's special representative to combat Islamophobia.
Those who knew the Afzaals say coming together at events like this offers some peace, but their lives remain forever changed.
This family was a gem. I am sure everybody will remember them. If I would say not so many people, but the close family friends and other people in the city, they will remember them always.
There are also anti-Islamophobia workshops being hosted in the community this week, and local libraries are highlighting Muslim authors. But many hope the family's legacy and the calls for change continue well beyond this anniversary.
Talia Ricci, CBC News, London, Ontario.
Toronto police have identified a man who was shot and killed early Sunday morning near Eglinton and Oakwood. 54-year-old Michael Barnes is the city's latest homicide victim. Police say there was a large gathering at a restaurant. Barnes became involved in an altercation and was shot just before 4 a.m. yesterday. He was pronounced dead in hospital. Police are asking any witnesses, especially those with video of the event, to come forward. The Office of the Fire Marshal is investigating the cause of a condo fire in Mississauga. Flames tore through a roof of a Meadowvale complex, displacing over 30 families. Alicia Son has the latest.
The fire started on a third-floor balcony. It soon spread to the roof.
Once it got in there, it's free to move very quickly. And our firefighters were on the third floor, pulling ceiling down, chasing that fire, trying to extinguish it. But as soon as it went through the roof, then it was able to jump over the fire stops. Basically, it was moving across the building. And compounding that, we had a lot of strong wind yesterday that was just feeding that fire.
To get the full scope of the damage, you have to see the apartment complex from above. For how hot it burned and how fast it spread, it's remarkable. Everyone was able to escape without injury.
Our firefighters did arrive on scene in a timely manner, ensured that they started that evacuation process as soon as possible.
36 families have been displaced by this fire. Many are staying at hotels with assistance from the Red Cross after fleeing with only the clothes on their back.
I stepped outside, I looked all around, everybody was like standing there, they're looking at the building on fire.
Some of the residents tell me they didn't realize the roof was on fire until the fire trucks actually arrived. Nobody heard any smoke alarms, which they say is puzzling because property management has been doing monthly checks. And you just assume that they're all working.
Yeah, because they come and you hear them go off at like 10 in the morning. They don't even let you sleep. And now that there's an actual fire and none of them went off, so can you believe that?
The Office of the Fire Marshal will investigate the status of the building's smoke alarms as well as the cause of the fire. Today, investigators found asbestos in the building, so residents won't be allowed inside to get their things until a hazmat team can assist. These people may not have left with much, but they all left with their lives, including their pets, like Lincoln, this couple's German Shepherd.
Our dog was in his crate.
This woman ran inside the burning building just in time.
That must have been really scary. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was scary because we just didn't know what was like, because we were watching it burn and it's just spreading so fast. So we didn't know, was it going to get to our unit or not? But we were grateful, like we got out, obviously we weren't in there, and then we got our dog. So yeah, like the most important things we have.
Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Mississauga.
All right, let's get the first look at the forecast with Dahlia Ashby. Hey, Dahlia.
Hey, Dwight, I hope you have an umbrella handy because you're going to need it today and tomorrow. So let's take a look at the current temperatures. So right now, the normal high this time of year is 23 degrees. We are sitting right at that mark, which is great. And the normal low is 13. We're sitting a bit above that at 14 degrees. The current temperature today in Toronto is 16 degrees, same thing in Mount Forest and Hamilton, so a bit on the cooler side in comparison to Windsor, which is a little bit on the warmer side, 21 degrees. We see the similar temperatures in Ottawa and Kingston. And the satellite radar here, let's take a look. So we do see a little bit of that rain peeking through. We are, like I said, you're going to need your umbrellas ready because the rain will be picking up today, and there is a risk of a thunderstorm as well. So as you can see, that rain is coming through and it is picking up. There is that risk of a thunderstorm that I mentioned earlier, and that's because of the cold front that was coming through. You can expect anywhere between 10 to 20 millimeters of water, 17 degrees tonight. Tomorrow, that rainfall will continue, 19 degrees, a little bit of those light winds. And because of the rainfall, there could be some flooding in some areas across the region. Could pick up the rainfall up to 25 millimeters of water. So like I said, just beware, have your umbrellas ready, but there is a bit of a break coming up on Wednesday, a little bit of sunshine.
All right, I guess you'll tell us about that a little later when we check back. Thank you, Dahlia.
Will do. Thanks, Dwight.
This weather update is brought to you by Charlevoix Train, one of the most beautiful railways in Canada. Discover this spectacular railway from Quebec City.
City of Toronto workers will no longer be able to approve invoices for people staying in hotels as part of the emergency shelter system. The change comes as an audit finds $13 million in taxpayer money was overspent on those hotels during the pandemic. Chris Glover has more.
When COVID struck, rows of close shelter beds made no sense, and the city scrambled to find 48 temporary sites, many of them hotels.
When they were otherwise not getting a lot of business. The two things work together.
But they did not work perfectly together, according to a scathing report by the Auditor General that hit the Audit Committee today.
There's a bit of time here to identify if there's some lessons learned so that every dollar in every bed is available for somebody in need.
The auditor's team says Toronto overspent by $13 million. Many of those charges were inappropriate double-ups.
What this one page shows with the pricing is that it's very clear on the pricing that it's inclusive of all costs.
Plus, the audit found $840,000 was spent on storing belongings that clients left behind, and nearly $70,000 was spent on printers. How much money realistically do you think could come back to the city?
Well, if it was up to me, it's everything, because we're talking millions of dollars.
The city's legal department is going back through invoices to see what can be recouped. And the biggest change announced today, it won't be housing staff, but corporate real estate staff approving invoices going forward.
Let the shelter people focus on what they do, run the shelters, and let the real estate people focus on what they do, which is manage real estate contracts.
What do you think of that so much of this was human error based off of city workers who are unfamiliar with these kinds of contracts?
It's about the higher levels of management.
Street nurse Kathy Crow blames managers for not establishing checks and balances around hotel expenditures earlier.
I'm surprised that there's not more shock and outrage. This has a human cost. This meant that people were not given a room that was sitting empty.
And this is an area where we've seen in multiple audits, multiple divisions, where it's a common theme.
From housing to forestry to snow removal, managing contracts better has been identified as a solution across the city. Fixing that can save millions of dollars, and in this case, lives. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
A survey out today suggests buying food has become a financial struggle for a growing number of people in this country. Almost a quarter of those who answered the phone poll done for Food Banks Canada said they were eating less than they should because of the cost. And food banks add the number of first-time users is on the rise. Jamie Strachan has more.
At this Toronto food bank, volunteers fill boxes as fast as they can. A perfect inflationary storm has pushed many Canadians to the edge.
Right now, we're seeing the largest number of people relying on our services in our 41-year history.
She warns of a very tough summer ahead. And a new Food Banks Canada survey shows why. It indicates about 7 million people reportedly going hungry sometime during the pandemic. In Toronto, she says the need is massive.
I think Daily Bread Food Bank reported an increase 100,000 more people per month. North York Harvest is also seeing unprecedented numbers.
This is not just a Toronto problem, but one playing out in towns, cities, and communities across Canada, where no one is immune to rising gas, housing, and food prices.
In Calgary, when Magic Larby visits a food bank these days, it's as a volunteer. But he knows what it's like to be hungry and desperate.
Sometimes it's like, well, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go, right? And what is that next meal going to be like?
There is a sense of desperation here, a common story at food banks across the country.
We had an economic bit of a slowdown, we had a pandemic on the heels of that, and with changes in the economy, the inflation and things like that, it puts greater pressure on families.
Food security experts say the impact of having limited resources to spend on food is felt especially in already marginalized groups.
Indigenous communities, many would say that is also the result of generations of colonialism and adverse effects of all of that, Black and racialized households. So that inequality is structured along class, gender, and racial lines.
At food banks across Canada, the word is this will be a summer of hunger, with both returning users and first-time clients increasingly depending on them. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
History was made during last week's provincial election with the first female independent MPP being elected to Ontario's legislature in more than 100 years. Bobby Ann Brady won in Haldimand, Norfolk, defeating Conservative candidate and town mayor Ken Hewitt.
It's very surreal after 27 days of just, giving everything you have and going, I hope it was enough on that 28th day.
Brady is well known in the community. She was a former staffer for Toby Barrett, who served the community as the Conservative MPP for 20 years. She sought the Conservative nomination, but when it went to Hewitt, she ran as an independent with Barrett's support. She credits the win to old-fashioned door-to-door canvassing. They live here, they pay taxes, but they are not allowed to vote. Every year, Canada admits hundreds of thousands of new permanent residents. A Brampton woman who received a voter ID card by mistake is now asking why the rules prevent her from participating in choosing the government that impacts her life. Farah Morelli explains.
I knew that I couldn't vote as a PR, but then when I got it, I was kind of confused.
That was Manit Nagra's reaction after she received a voter information card for last week's Ontario provincial election. As a permanent resident, she can't legally vote, but after she got it, she wondered if the rules had changed.
I got kind of excited. I was like, I can vote. And then I searched it up. Turns out I can't vote.
Nagra was sent the card erroneously, but she's now questioning why people like her can't vote here. She's lived in Canada most of her life and is impacted by government policies and pays taxes.
These aren't tourists. They're not just stopping through for fun. These are people who live here. Their kids go to school here. Absolutely, every single one of them should have the right to vote.
So who makes the rules when it comes to voting? Turns out it's the province. They determine who can vote in municipal and provincial elections. Right now, only Canadian citizens 18 and up can cast a ballot, which mirrors Ottawa's federal voting laws. But at least one province is looking to change the rules. New Brunswick is poised to pass legislation that would allow permanent residents to vote in its 2026 municipal election.
There are over 50 countries in the world now that extend voting rights in a country's election to people living in that country who are not yet citizens of that country. So it's not like this is some, really radical or wild proposition. It's actually done in a whole number of countries.
We asked the province if it would consider allowing permanent residents to vote, but didn't get a response in time.
I consider myself Canadian, even though I'm not technically Canadian. I think I should be able to vote.
As for Nagra, she says she believes voter turnout would be higher if people like her could cast a ballot.
If they let permanent residents vote, I guess it would encourage a whole new set of people to vote.
Farah Morelli, CBC News, Toronto.
It was a sweep for Doug Ford and the PCs in Brampton last week. They may have caught some by surprise, as the city has been NDP orange in recent memory. Dale Manutluck takes a look at the driving factor for change.
27-year-old Brampton East MPP Hardeep Greywall campaigned hard. Despite going against an incumbent in Guratin Singh with strong recognition, he was confident.
And we told them what we wanted to do for Brampton. We told them our vision. We told them how the Premier has been delivering again and again for Brampton over the last 4 years, and that message resonated.
That message included a desperately needed second hospital and a medical school. But all the chatter on the ground, according to Brampton-based political strategist Jaskaran Sandhu, was Highway 413.
Local campaigns felt it as well, that the 403 actually had a lot of support. This is primarily a trucking and transportation town.
He notes that while the NDP lost 3 ridings, everything would have had to go right to get reelected.
So the NDP had the best showing they ever had. The Liberals were completely tanked out. The PCs didn't do well locally during that election. And Sarah Singh still only squeezed through a victory.
But how much can be extrapolated from what unfolded in Brampton this time around?
Brampton is one of those places that is an island unto itself in terms of the politics, in terms of the issues. Even if you go back to the last federal election and you take a look at who ran and who didn't, and who won and who didn't, it's clear that ties to the local community mean a heck of a lot.
Sharma says it's also important for candidates to understand the dynamics of multi-generational homes, Graywall credits living with his grandparents, who are still under the same roof today, for being able to communicate to thousands of voters.
When I go talk to people, I can talk to them in Hindi, I can talk to them in Punjabi, I can talk to them obviously in English, and I can talk to them a little bit in Urdu, and that just comes from being with my grandparents from a young age, learning our native language of Punjabi, and then being in the community and slowly grasping onto other languages.
He says now that he's the MPP-elect, he represents all of Brampton East. Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Brampton.
Indigenous identity has become a hot topic in recent years, with a number of high-profile figures facing allegations they have exaggerated or even fabricated their ties to First Nations, Inuit, or Métis communities. Tonight, senior investigative reporter Jonathan Gatehouse brings us another such story about a traditional healer who has quietly left his well-paid job with the Toronto hospital amid questions about his heritage.
If we don't smudge under the armpits, it holds negative energy.
Ernest Matton was one of the public faces of Toronto's Michael Garron Hospital for a decade, a Métis elder who headed their Aboriginal healing program, earning accolades for his work and making more than $120,000 a year, according to public records. But in early May, Matton, who also goes by his adopted Mohawk name Little Brown Bear, abruptly retired after members of Toronto's Indigenous community raised concerns about his background.
He's self-indigenizing himself, and he's profiting off of it, like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Tian Hupfield, an Indigenous educator and powwow dance teacher, became suspicious of Matton's potpourri mix of First Nations teachings, her worries crystallizing when no one could tell her exactly where Elder Little Brown Bear came from.
And I was really, really mad. So I sent a complaint to the hospital, and they said they sent my complaint to his supervisor, and then I never heard anything back from them.
Hello?
Hi, can I speak to Elder Little Brown Bear, please?
Speaking.
CBC News reached out to Matton. He didn't want to answer our questions, citing family medical reasons. Michael Garron Hospital also declined an interview, but said in a statement that the hospital took the matter very seriously, working with Matton to investigate the situation and take the necessary steps to verify his ancestry. Matton presented the hospital with an old Métis Nation of Ontario citizenship card, but it seems his status with the organization isn't clear-cut. The MNO began vetting its 24,000 members in 2017 to prepare for self-government, requiring those who claim historic links to the community to document those Métis ties. 5 years later, 5,300 people on their list still have incomplete files, Matton among them.
He was kind. He was gentle.
The controversy has left those who turn to Matton for help struggling for answers.
Let's go, Mama.
Melanie Bartel is Ojibwe, but was adopted and raised by a white family.
Let's go.
Little Brown Bear was her first cultural mentor, until doubt started creeping in.
He was a Métis man, and he was doing ceremonies and speaking the Ojibwe language. And he was also claiming to be Mohawk. So that combination just seemed very strange to me.
She's full of questions for Matton and Michael Garron Hospital.
They owe us an explanation. How many years was he teaching things to people and having people trust him, only to turn around and find out that he may not be who he said he was?
Jonathan Gatehouse, CBC News, Toronto.
The federal banking regulator sent mystery shoppers to branches of Canada's big banks to see how they sell their products and services. They found that racialized and Indigenous customers are more often pitched inappropriate products. The undercover survey was prompted in part by a Go Public investigation into high-pressure sales tactics. Erica Johnson has more.
It started when these 3 TD Bank employees told Go Public they had to upsell customers to meet sales targets and keep their jobs.
Customers deserve to know what's being done to them at their institution.
Soon, more than 3,000 current and former employees from all the big banks had written, describing a high-pressure sales culture. The banking regulator promised to conduct a mystery shopper survey, the first of its kind in Canada. It sent people posing as customers into more than 700 branches across the country. A key finding, 32% of secret shoppers who identified as visible minority or Indigenous were pitched overdraft protection with monthly fees and accrued interest, almost double other shoppers. 13% were offered credit card balance protection insurance, which often doesn't pay out, much higher than other shoppers.
They're making this assumption that Black, racialized, and Indigenous people are more likely to default or overextend themselves.
Shoppers also reported a big push on premium credit cards with higher fees that typically require a minimum income. But in 80% of cases, customers were not asked about their income.
Banks are going to push people to the highest cost items, even if they don't need it, because they make more profits that way.
The regulator says more can be done by banks to protect customers from concerning sales practices, like ensuring frontline staff are effectively trained.
We should actually be thinking about, why is it that there is so much pressure for them to sell? That it actually compromises the bank's integrity and commitment to taking care of the financial health of Canadians.
New rules for the banks come into effect at the end of this month in an attempt to make sure customers are only offered products and services they need. Meantime, we continue to hear from bank employees who say the pressure to sell remains strong. Erica Johnson, CBC News, Vancouver.
The inquiry investigating the 2020 mass shooting in Nova Scotia is looking more closely at how police communicated with each other while the gunman was at large. He killed 22 people on April 18th and 19th before he was shot dead by officers. The commission has heard the RCMP had little communication with its nearest local counterpart. Brett Ruskin has more.
Dave Mcneal is the police chief for Toro, Nova Scotia. Now, it's a town at the intersection of two Trans-Canada highways, and it's just down the road from Portapique where this shooting began. So, April of 2020, his dispatchers and officers began getting updates about this shooting as the events unfolded, as the shooter moved across the region. Now, the RCMP, after the shooting, began collecting surveillance footage from local businesses, trying to recreate the shooter's route through the region. And it turns out the shooter drove right through the middle of the town of Toro along major roadways. So when was the police chief notified about this? Well, he was asked about that today and testified that he didn't hear that the shooter drove right through the middle of town until about a week later when he saw it on the news. Now, the other point that was covered today had to do with the Alert Ready system. Now, that's the notification program that would have alerted people, residents across Nova Scotia, about the danger being posed by this active shooter situation, would have sent a message directly to their phones, across radio signals, TV signals as well, but that was not used by the RCMP. Instead, they opted to tweet out details to warn the public. Now today, Chief Mcneal from the Toro Police Service said that the system was a system that he likes using, that his service and his force likes using, that is simple to use, and one that his force has used in the past as well as after the shooting too. Now, later on this week, the inquiry will continue as more RCMP officers will continue their testimony about the types of communication and the decisions made to notify the public about the active shooter situation. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.
The city announced a new long-term care pilot project today called Care TO.
But it seemed sometimes as if the rules, which were put there for very good reasons, took away from the individuality of the care that could be offered. That you had to focus on the fact you were dealing with a person.
Mayor Toro says the pandemic has forced a rethink of the way long-term care is handled in Toronto, and that Care TO will follow a new philosophy that puts individual needs first. The program will cost $16 million, including $12 million from the province. Much of that will go towards staffing and training. The new approach will focus less on schedule-driven model of care and more on engagement in areas such as outdoor activities. Residents will have more flexibility with recreational activities and more consistency with their caregivers. The pilot project will run for 12 months at Lakeshore Lodge, which is one of 10 long-term care facilities run by the city. And any outdoor activities over the next little while, we'll have to take cover.
That's absolutely right. Or just bring a raincoat. And I mean, you can still enjoy the weather outside if you're prepared. So let's start off, like I said, there is that that raincoat that you're going to need and your umbrellas because there's a risk of thunderstorm this evening and you're going to need the umbrellas for tomorrow. But you do get a bit of a break and so do the flowers and a little bit of sunshine to help them grow throughout the week. And the current temperature today is 16 degrees. It's a little bit on the cooler side if we compare it to Oshawa, 18 degrees. Hamilton is much cooler than Toronto, though, 15 degrees. And as you can see, we get that cold front, so it starts to push a little bit of that rain into Toronto, and it will increase throughout the evening, and there will be a risk of a thunderstorm. So as we take a look at tonight, that rain starts to peak in. There's a lot of activity there, as you could see, and that starts to get a lot heavier as we head into tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. By the evening, it will clear a little bit. There will be some light rain. And by Wednesday, we get a little bit of a break, and so do the flowers, like I mentioned earlier. Thursday, you get a little bit of break as well, but that rain starts to peak in again. As you can see, there is a bit of that accumulation of rain that will happen. So in Toronto, 2 millimeters today, but as we go into Tuesday, it does start to increase. And as you can see, it starts to increase more and more as we head into a Tuesday afternoon, 55 millimeters. So that could cause some flooding in some areas depending on where you are. And there is that wind that also starts to push that rainfall, causing that thunderstorm that we were talking about earlier. Overnight, so tonight, we are expecting the risk of thunderstorm that we talked about earlier. So 17 degrees tonight, most of the area is 17 as well. And as we take a look at the week, as I said, you do get a little bit of that break on Wednesday, 22 degrees, but tonight it will be 19 degrees with that risk of thunderstorm. Friday, a little bit of that break as well, 23 degrees. Low 12 degrees. So expect to have those accumulation of the rain coming through and have your umbrellas and everything ready. But like I said, Friday, you get a bit of a break and you can head outdoors and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you, Dahlia.
Thanks, Dwight.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson survived a no-confidence vote initiated against by some within his own Conservative Party. While he gets to remain in office, the nays suggest a significant opposition to his leadership. Chris Brown has the details.
With his political future in peril, Prime Minister Boris Johnson faced a decisive vote, needing support from at least 180 of his Conservative MPs to keep his job. And he got that.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
That Boris Johnson is elected as the leader of the Conservative...
Johnson's undeniable charm and a promise to get Britain's exit from the European Union done first won him the Conservative leadership and then an election.
Will you take responsibility, Prime
But 3 years later, that affability has worn thin. A series of boozy office parties at Number 10, while the rest of the country was in a tough COVID lockdown, led to a police investigation and then a damning report by a top civil servant. Johnson's denials and efforts to dodge accountability only seem to make things worse.
I don't think you can be in charge of setting the rules during lockdown and then blatantly allowing people under your direct leadership to break those rules.
He was booed when he appeared at the Queen's Jubilee and in front of the entire world became the butt of jokes.
And I tell you what, finally we can say the words party and gate and it's a positive.
As soon as the thank yous to the Queen were out of the way, his political enemies made their move.
It should be a resignation issue for him. It's certainly a resignation issue for me.
In advance of the vote, Johnson wrote a personal letter to every member of caucus, and his supporters lined up at the microphones with a message for those on the fence.
I think the focus now has to be, as I say, not on the chaos of a divisive or destructive leadership contest, but to back the PM today.
In the end, whether out of loyalty or a desire for stability or something else, Johnson survived the biggest crisis of his long career, but badly damaged, says this political watcher.
I think Boris Johnson surviving this vote doesn't mean that there's imminent demise of his premiership. It just means that the party, the government, will continue to struggle.
Other Conservative occupants of 10 Downing Street, from Margaret Thatcher to Theresa May, discovered that winning a confidence vote doesn't always settle the matter. So divisive was the process that within months of winning, both leaders ended up resigning anyway. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
The UK government is promising to help boost Ukraine's firepower in the war against Russia. Britain is sending 3 missile launchers. They'll be similar to these supplied by France and now seeing action in the front line in the eastern Donbass region. Last week, the U.S. announced it's giving 4 missile launchers to Ukraine's war effort. Meantime, there are new health concerns today for the thousands of Ukrainians living under Russian occupation in Mariupol. An advisor to the ousted mayor says Russian forces have quarantined the strategic port city because of a suspected cholera outbreak. Mariupol fell last month after weeks of bombardment, which has resulted in a lack of access to clean water. As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX closed up by 28 points. The Dow also up by just 16 points, and the dollar traded lower at 79.40 cents US. We'll be right back. Work is getting underway near Toronto Western Hospital to provide the building with a new renewable energy source.
Initially, 19 megawatts of thermal energy, heating and cooling in the form of chilled water and hot water will be supplied using transferred energy from the sewage below us to the buildings behind us at Toronto Western Hospital.
Tori on hand for today's groundbreaking ceremony. This is being described as the largest wastewater energy transfer project in the world. The first stage involves building a wet well. Eventually, it will provide 90% of the hospital's heating and cooling through an emissions-free process. David Suzuki and his wife Tara Koulis are starring in a play in Toronto this week, and the way they arrived in the city this morning sent a message about our reliance on fossil fuels.
We're embedded in a system in which virtually everything we do is ultimately provided by the use of fossil fuels, and we've got to find a way to change the way we live. And one of the biggest ones is the way we travel.
Suzuki and Koulis drove here from Vancouver entirely by electric vehicle. They left on May 27th, taking a little over a week to get to Toronto, both saying they wanted to make the trip as low carbon as possible. They're hoping the drive helps spark conversation about what is more needed to make Canada what more is needed rather to make Canada a carbon neutral country. Our Nationals men's soccer team refused to take the field for a match in Vancouver yesterday. The players and Soccer Canada are fighting over compensation following Canada's World Cup qualification. Stephen D'Souza has the details.
Back in March, the road to qualify for the World Cup came to an end. Canadian players were on a high. But off the pitch, the battle over compensation was just beginning. The dispute became public and ugly this weekend. Canada's game against Panama canceled, players sitting out, and fans left hanging.
We finally get to see some excitement for the beautiful game in our country, and this is what happens.
The men's national team blamed the Canadian Soccer Association for delaying talks. They asked for 40% of the bonus money Canada receives for qualifying for the World Cup. Canada Soccer said its proposal is in line with other countries.
I can't accept an offer that will put our organization in a financial position that is untenable.
Canada gets $10 million for qualifying for the Men's World Cup, and observers say that money is unlike anything the governing body has dealt with before.
If you boil it right down, the root of it comes to just a mistrust between the players and the CSA, and I think that stems from a lack of transparency over the years that the CSA has demonstrated.
He says the issue also highlights bigger challenges at Canada Soccer.
It is volunteers, and they have different agendas in different parts of the country. This is a complicated country to run anything in, and when you have a lot of money coming into the situation, it becomes even more complicated.
Both sides appear to want to make sure the women's team gets an equal share of bonus money.
I honestly believe that we're suffering from
It is one of North America's largest cultural festivals and something Torontonians have probably missed over the last 2 years.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted and excited to be standing here with you because the Toronto Carnival is back. The Toronto Caribbean Carnival is back and here to stay. We happy about that? Yes.
The Caribbean Carnival is making its return this summer from July 28th to August 1st this year. It's celebrated annually on Emancipation Day weekend. The parade hasn't been on the lakeshore since 2019. The festival celebrates freedom from slavery as well as Caribbean heritage with music, food, and culture. The King and Queen and Steel Pan Showcase Pan Alive are also back. 10,000 masqueraders will be on the road for the Grand Parade come that weekend. And I'll be out there. I won't be in costume, but I'll be down there. And rain or shine, we're going to be on the road partying on that Cinco de weekend. Yes.
You know, Dwight, I've actually never been to Carnival here in Toronto, so I think this year will be my chance, especially with the hiatus with the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to that. But I mean, that is some bright news for those that like to attend that. But I do have some, you know, I'm going to shower you with some information right now. And I hope you all have umbrellas ready because there is a risk of thunderstorm this evening. Can expect anywhere between 10 to 20 millimeters of rain. Right now, we're sitting at 16 degrees in Toronto, 18 degrees in Sarnia. Windsor is 21 degrees, so a little bit warmer out there. It actually feels like 28 degrees in Windsor today with that humidity. And like I said, there is a risk of thunderstorm this evening. So 17 degrees tonight, and it's going to last until tomorrow afternoon, 19 degrees. So make sure you have your umbrellas ready on hand. But things do look a little brighter as we get to Wednesday. We get a little bit of that break from the rainfall, so you can put your umbrellas away on Tuesday night. But Thursday, make sure to have your umbrellas ready because there is a 30% chance of rain. Dwight?
I've got one in my briefcase. Thank you, Dahlia.
No problem. Thanks, Dwight.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Late night is preempted for hockey tonight. We're going to see you back here tomorrow at 6. Stay safe and have a great night, everybody.